Well, I was privileged to have a couple Sundays off to take a short vacation. And so now I'm back. And as I was preparing for the message this week, I was planning on continuing our look at the book of First Peter. But then last minute realized or thought about, we are entering into the Thanksgiving and the Christmas season. And maybe I should focus on those things over the next few weeks. And so today we're going to be talking about living with a grateful heart, thinking about Thanksgiving. And I want to begin with a story. There's a story about a sociology professor who once gave his students an unusual assignment. He sent them out to the poorest areas of Baltimore, and he asked his students to find 200 boys between the ages of 12 and 16 and to predict their futures based on their current circumstances. And after the students did their research, the students concluded that 90% of those boys, of those 200 boys, would spend time in prison. Well, 25 years later, there was another professor that came and he found this study, and so he decided to follow up with those boys. And to his amazement, of the 180 of the 200 boys that he could locate, only 4 of them had been in prison. And he was intrigued by that, and so he asked each man what had made the difference, and again their response was, there was this teacher. And so that professor, he tracked down this teacher who is now in her 80s and asked her what her secret was. And she smiled and she simply said that, I loved those boys. And I made sure they knew it. Every single day, I helped them find something to be thankful for. Even if it was just having shoes on their feet or breakfast that morning. We started every class by sharing one thing we were grateful for. Gratitude changed how they saw the world. And so this Thanksgiving, I want to talk about how gratitude can transform not just our perspective, but our entire lives. And first, we're going to talk about how gratitude can shift our focus from what's missing in our lives to what is given in our lives. And we look at Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 to 13. Paul writes, I am not saying this because I am in need. He was asking for help. For I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And so there was Paul's description of just that contentment, that thankfulness in whatever situation he was in, whether he had plenty or whether he had need. And how that focus on gratitude can turn us away from, the woe is me type of things that take place. And there was a story about back in the Great Depression, that there was a young mother named Sarah who found herself with 5 children to feed and almost nothing in the pantry except some flour and a few potatoes. And her children, they were just complaining about having potato soup again. And we can probably relate to that in certain times of our lives. But they were complaining about having to have soup again when there was a knock at the door. And they opened the door, and it was a traveling man who was even more destitute than Sarah and her children. And he asked if there would be any work that he could do for a meal. Well, Sarah looked at her pot of soup and then her children, and she made this decision. She said, children, we're going to set another place at the table. And as they shared that simple meal, that traveling man told stories of his travels, making children laugh for the first time in weeks. And before leaving, he said, "Ma'am, I've eaten at many tables, but this is the finest meal I've had in months. Not because of the food, but because of the gratitude in this home." And after he left, Sarah's youngest said, "Mama, I didn't know we had so much to share." And Sarah replied, "We always have something when we're grateful for what God provides." And so, changing our focus, shifting our focus on what we are thankful for can impact our entire life. And so gratitude that shifts our focus, what are some things that we can do? What are some things that we can do to make sure we are focused on thankfulness, focused on gratitude for what God has given us? Just being mindful of, what are you thankful for? What are you thankful for? For what you have. Maybe thankful for what you don't have. Or maybe when you catch yourself complaining about something, stop and name 3 blessings in that very situation. For me personally, we're having some major issues with our home. And I can grumble about that. But I can also say, I have a roof over my head. It's a place that is home. I am protected there. And so what are those things that we can be thankful for, even if we're in bad situations? What are those things that we can be thankful for and shift our focus to that gratitude? So gratitude shifts our focus. Number 2, gratitude can transform our trials. And in this one, we're looking at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 to 18. Again, Paul writing. It says, "Rejoice always." This is a tough one. "Rejoice always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances. For this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." That's a big thing to ask of ourselves, to rejoice always, in good times and bad, to pray continually when things are going great and when things are not, to give thanks in all circumstances, again, during the good times and the bad, because that's God's will for you in Christ Jesus, is to be thankful. So gratitude can transform our trials. And a good story on that one is Joni Eareckson Tada. She was 17 years old when there was a diving accident, and it left her paralyzed from the shoulders down. And she says that for months she wrestled with anger and despair and the question, why? Why did this happen to me? But with the support from friends and family, she began to find things to be thankful for. The friend who visited daily, or the nurse who took extra time to encourage her, or the ability to still see the beauty of a sunset. And if you look at her life, now more than 50 years later, she has touched millions of people's lives through her ministry to people with disabilities. She often says, "I'd rather be in this wheelchair knowing Jesus than on my feet without him." She discovered that gratitude didn't change her circumstances, but it transformed her response to them. And in her own words, she said, "Even in the darkest times, when I thank God for the nurses who turn me at night, for friends who call, for the ability to breathe on my own, suddenly the darkness doesn't seem so overwhelming. Gratitude is like turning on a light in a dark room." And so here is someone that lost her ability or functions from shoulders down. And yet she was able to be grateful for the things that she was given during those times. And so, what are some ways that we can have that gratitude to transform our trials? Maybe it's writing a thank you note to someone who helped you through a difficult time. Just thanking them for what they've done. Or maybe it's keeping a trial transformation journal, writing down a current struggle, and one thing you can thank God for within it. What is the hardship that you're facing? What's the one thing you can thank God for? It's as simple as that, and that gratitude can transform our trials into testimonies. Number 3, gratitude multiplies our blessings. And for this one, we are looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 10 and 11. Again, this is Paul that's writing this. Paul had a phenomenal ministry and was able to impact people's lives in so many different ways, but the thankfulness, the gratitude that he had. And so 2 Corinthians chapter 9, now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. And so gratitude multiplies our blessings through generosity. And he's just reminding the people, God will provide the seed, God provides the bread, God will do all these things, and we just need to be thankful for all that he does. Another story. Like I said, today's a little different, just finding some stories to share. There was a small church in rural Kansas that faced a dilemma. Their building needed a new roof, requiring $15,000 that they didn't have. In our church, we just experienced this not that long ago, having to replace our roof. During their Thanksgiving service planning, someone suggested that they take up a special offering, not for their roof, but for a sister church in Haiti that had been destroyed by a hurricane. And the pastor, when he heard this suggestion, he was hesitant, and he said, how can we give when we have such a great need ourselves? We don't have the money for our own roof, and yet we want to send money off to somewhere else. And an elderly farmer stood up and he said, Pastor, I've been farming for 60 years. I've learned you can't harvest what you don't plant. Let's plant seeds of gratitude and see what God grows. And so that Thanksgiving, that little congregation of about 50 people raised $3,000 for Haiti. And within a month, word of their generosity spread. And a contractor offered to do the roof of their church at cost, and a lumber company donated the materials, and other churches sent offerings to them. And by Christmas, they had a new roof and had sent another $5,000 to Haiti. And the farmer said later, when gratitude opens your hands to give, God opens his hands to provide. And so when we are thankful, we have gratitude for what we have, and we are generous with that thankfulness, we are generous with that gratitude, we are generous with what God has given to us, it returns through blessings. One thing we could do to experience that is to choose a family or organization to bless this Thanksgiving with an unexpected gift. And I know for our church, we're taking up collection for a family for Christmas. And it's those kinds of things that we are we are thankful for what we have, but we are generous and we help others, and it returns as a blessing. You know, maybe practice grateful giving. For every blessing that we count, that we find a way to bless someone else. Just being thankful for what we have been given. Number 4, when it comes to thankfulness, gratitude builds bridges in our relationships. Colossians chapter 3, verses 15 to 17. Again, Paul writing this. He says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." And so he talks about that thankfulness and gratitude, and how it can build bridges in the relationships that we have with one another. And there's a story about a man named Tom and his brother Mark, who hadn't spoken for 5 years after a disagreement tore their family apart. And every holiday was awkward because family members had to carefully schedule separate celebrations with those brothers. Well, one Thanksgiving, Tom's daughter was asked to write what she was thankful for in school. And this is what she wrote. She wrote, "I am thankful for my Uncle Mark because he taught me to ride a bike before he and Daddy stopped talking." So even if it was a bad situation, she was thankful for what Mark had done before the family tore apart. Well, when her dad, Tom, read that, it broke his heart. And so that night he called Mark, and his voice was shaking, and he said, "I'm thankful for the brother who stayed up all night with me when Mom was in the hospital. I'm thankful for the brother who was my best man, and I'm sorry I forgot to be thankful for you." And Mark was quiet, and then he said, "Well, I'm thankful for the brother who's calling me right now." And that Thanksgiving, the whole family gathered together. And before dinner, Tom stood and said, "This year, I'm most thankful for second chances and for a family that is complete again." And so if we can find the gratitude, the thankfulness in those severed relationships, it could bring back that bond that was once there. And so maybe one thing we could do is to call or write someone that we've been estranged from and share one thing you're grateful for about them. Might open the doors for reconnection, for growth in that relationship. And then number 5, gratitude connects us to God's heart. And for this one, we're going to go to the Psalms. Psalm 100, verses 4 and 5. It says, "Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations." And so just being thankful for whatever situation we find ourselves in, and how that thankfulness, that gratitude can connect us to God. Another story, that a man by the name of Brother Lawrence, and I believe he did some phenomenal things. There are stories written about this man. But he was a 17th century monk who worked in the monastery kitchen. While others sought God through elaborate prayers and disciplines, Brother Lawrence found him while washing dishes. He discovered that gratitude was his gateway to God's presence. He would thank God for the water to clean with, for the food to prepare, for the brothers to serve. He said, I flip my omelet in the frying pan for the love of God. And when it's done, if I have nothing to do, I prostrate myself on the floor and worship the God who gave me the grace to make it. So his simple practice of that gratitude, that thankfulness, transformed not just his own life, but influenced countless others who came to learn from the kitchen monk who lived in constant communion with God through gratitude. He taught them, we don't need to be in church to be with God. We just need to have a thankful heart, and every moment becomes a prayer. It may be a great way to have that gratitude that connects us to God would be to begin each morning by thanking God for 5 specific things before our feet even hit the floor. And that's a lesson I need to take in too. Thankful that I'm alive. Thankful that I have the covers to to stay warm through the night. Thankful for my family. Thankful for, and just what are those 5 things that you can be thankful for before you even get up in the morning? Or maybe practice gratitude prayers throughout the day that you thank God in the moment for the small blessings as they happen. God, thank you for the clouds in the sky. Thank you for the sighting of that eagle. Thank you for, and you just have gratitude for everything. And so this Thanksgiving, I want us to focus on living with a grateful heart. There's a story about a man, and this is an old story, but there's truth in it. Old story about a man who dreamed he was walking along the beach with the Lord. And looking back over his life, he noticed that during the hardest times, there was only one set of footprints. And troubled by this, he asked the Lord, he says, why did you abandon me when I needed you most? But the Lord replied, my child, I never left you. It's during your times of trial when you see only one set of footprints, it was then that I was carrying you. And as that man looked again at those single footprints, he noticed they were deeper than the other footsteps because of the heavier load. And with tears in his eyes, he said, Lord, forgive me. I was so focused on what seemed missing that I failed to be grateful for your strength that carried me through. And so this Thanksgiving season, as we look back on our year, we might see times of abundance and times of want, mountains and valleys, joys and sorrows. But if we look closely with grateful hearts, we'll see that we were never alone. Every footprint in our journey, whether single or double, is evidence of God's faithful presence. And so as we gather around with family, friends for this Thanksgiving, we need to remember that gratitude, Thanksgiving, it isn't a feeling. It's a choice, a discipline, and a pathway to joy. Now you think about the pilgrims that celebrated that first Thanksgiving. They had lost half of their number to disease and starvation. And yet they chose to give thanks. They understood what we sometimes forget. That Thanksgiving isn't about having everything. It's about being thankful for everything we have. And so we need to start where we are, use what we have, be thankful for even those things that may seem small, and watch how God multiplies our gratitude into joy, our joy into generosity, and our generosity into a testimony of his faithfulness that will inspire others to give thanks. I pray you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, a holiday, and I hope to see you again next time as we dive into the Christmas season. God bless. Have a great week.